You don't want me to sleep for 9 months? Okay, guess you don't need your degree. Welcome back to Reddit Chronicles. If you're new here, do consider subscribing to help me feed my channel and grow my cat. Let's get started. So, I wasn't sure if this story qualified for pro or petty. Everything I do over the course of this is extremely petty, but I think it is probably what I would consider a scale up from low tier revenge, mostly on account of the last part. So, some backstory. This was about 6 years ago, during my first year at university. In the UK, you basically have two options for accommodations in your first year. The first option is called halls. I'm guessing that's not the mint candy. You stay in a huge apartment complex with a bunch of different students. You share a floor with about 10 to 15 people. Or you go to a student house, which is basically a normal house that some greedy landlord converts all available space into bedrooms for 5 to 6 people. But this is not always the case. In my second year, I lived in a house with 15 people. Many petty revenge stories there, if I find the time to type them out. Anyway, I chose the latter. I moved into what would be a 3-bedroom house, turned into a 5-bedroom. What would have been a living room was converted into a bedroom below my room. 3 of my housemates were fine. We were civil to one another, but not really friends. We just lived different lives. We would go out for the occasional bevy, have dinner together, but mostly just coexist peacefully. Notice how I said it was a 5-bedroom though? I wonder what a bevy is. Enter a housemate in question. Let's call her Kathy. Kathy was of African descent, very rich parents, sent to live in the UK to study engineering, as the educational system in her native country was very poor. She was short, fat, and quite obnoxious. When I moved in, I made a point of introducing myself to everyone. My first impression of Kathy wasn't great. An issue I noticed immediately, of which persists throughout the entirety of our living together, is that Kathy stinks. You know when you work out for 4 hours, but you crash out and forget the shower before? It was like that times 1,000. It was extensively unbearable. On top of that, Kathy is really rude. She basically starts out by saying she's been here for 2 years already, and she wasn't gonna change again this year. This had me a little concerned, but at the time, it wasn't a huge issue. I told her I kept to myself a lot, so she shouldn't see any problems from me. The first week or so, I didn't notice many problems. I was out partying hard during most nights. At English universities, the first week is called Freshers, where everyone goes out and gets wasted for a week, the week before studies starts. Other than some of my food going missing and dirty plates staying on the side, it's week 1, it's fine. But of course we all know it's gonna get worse. Then Kathy rears her ugly head. What did I say? So, I'm going to bed at 9 p.m, the first night before studies. I had an hour commute to my campus, and first day, I wanted to be very awake, and I hear her shouting downstairs. She sounds very excited. I would find out tonight that Kathy is an avid gamer. Now myself, I love games. I have late night sessions all the time, but I'm respectful of my housemates. I lie in bed, awake until 2:30 a.m, hearing Kathy scream at her monitor and the sounds of a shooter in the background, very loudly. I didn't want to be a bad housemate, so I let it happen. I barely slept, and I went into my first lecture completely exhausted from sleep deprivation. I figured it was a one-off, or it might happen every now and again. I was very wrong. This actually reminds me of something I went through. Maybe I'll share it at the end. This carried on for 4 days before I said something. On the Friday, I approach her in the kitchen and politely say, "Hey, don't want to be rude, but can you try and keep it down a little at night? I can hear you loud and clear through the floor, and it's really messing with my sleep." I don't want to be rude, but I've noticed it's been happening a lot. She basically tells me I'm overreacting. She's doing nothing wrong. Nobody else has complained, so it's not a real issue. Kathy shares a wall with another housemate on the ground floor, so when she gets home, I ask her about the issue. Turns out, Kathy gave her the same spiel as to me. We knock on her door and ask what's the problem, together. She gives us this whole sob story about how hard it is to make friends, that her online friends are her family, They live across the world, and she doesn't want to break that relationship. I feel bad, stupidly, and tell her I totally get it, but just try and be a little quieter on weeknights. She says, "I'll try, maybe," and we leave it at that. That night, I slept fine. I thought it was over. The next night, she's screaming again, but it's the weekend, so I get high as a kite and fall asleep in the bathtub. Sunday night rolls around. She's screaming again. I can hear the sound of her rifle firing in game, and she's shouting obscenities with every shot. It gets to 11 p.m., and I go downstairs and knock. Nothing. I wait a little while and try again. No change. I try again. Same. So I go to the back garden and knock on her window. I hear her shout, "F off!" a few times and give up. I go to bed, but not to sleep. This happens for the next few weeks. She screams, I go to confront, she screams at me through the wall until I leave. I approach her in the day, and she tells me she could hear me, doesn't know what I'm talking about, and I must have been dreaming. Think of a BS excuse, and it's probably on the list of things she would say. So begins the revenge. I start by just going downstairs, flicking the power off and on for the router, and going back upstairs. The house is kind of old and creaky, so it's pretty obvious that as the Wi-Fi goes down, it's me. This happens a few nights until she confronts me as I'm leaving in the morning. I tell her bluntly, "Yeah, it's me. Stop with the screaming, or things are just going to get worse." She threatens to call our landlord on me. Great idea. I leave the house, go to my lectures, and after university, I visit the landlord. I tell him the entire story about everything that's happening and how hard it's making our lives. He said he'll look into it. Please be patient. More weeks go by. No more pranks from me, but no interference from the landlord. The night I contacted him was silent, but after that, everything went back to Screamapalooza. I contact him again. He says trust him. No changes. I try again. Guess what? No changes. So I start getting pettier. So I failed to mention before, at least in great detail, that Kathy is messy as F. She would eat, then leave all her plates, pots, and pans on the side and return to her lair. For the first month, we just washed them up for her. Nobody wants a messy kitchen. But I was pissed off. So I started a new system. If I see dirty plates of hers, I'd leave it in front of her door. This was funny for a few days, until I started finding my dirty plates she used at my door. From this point on, all kitchen equipment that was mine would from here on out live in my room until the end of my tenancy. This went on for another sleepless week until I'm awoken by my landlord with a police officer. I'm told I've been stealing from my housemates and I need to go to the station. I promptly explain the situation and my other housemates back me up. The officer is clearly annoyed to have his time wasted by us and leaves. Me, the housemates, Kathy, and landlord have a group discussion on how to end the hostilities. We demand quiet weeknights and a clean kitchen. In exchange, we, although really it was just me, will not perform passive-aggressive petty revenge. Seems like a fair deal, right? No. Landlord said he can't give any preferential treatment, so we need to stop regardless. I'm glad to say though, even though this guy was an awful landlord, he never interfered again, allowing for further pettiness to ensue. So, back to revenge. Kathy would run an Ethernet cable from the modem to her computer, along the floor, and into her room. I would start unplugging this cable anytime she was screaming. Kathy then started taping the cable, so it was harder to pull out the sockets. It got to a point where a hallway had a huge mess of tape and wire going across from the router all the way to her room. But Kathy. I bought a roll of the same tape she'd used, waited for her to leave the house. I had to wait 3 weeks for this opportunity. When I finally had the chance, I pulled up the tape, took a pair of scissors, cut the cable, and taped it all back down. How she got into university was beyond me, as she didn't figure it out for a few days. I slept wonderfully those nights. She confronted me days later and accused me of my crime. I simply denied it. and slammed the door in her face. After this, it was fairly passive-aggressive on both sides. Anytime I heard the noise, I'd unplug the cable. She'd start eating my food, so I ended up buying a mini fridge and storing all my food in my room, and she would regularly throw out my belongings if I left them around the house. It was all getting a bit too much. Mid-year, I bought a cheap Turtle Beach headset. I knocked on her door and offered it as a peace treaty. I said the noise had to stop and the revenge was starting to get out of hand. Please, take the headset, continue to enjoy your games, but I desperately need sleep. She took the headset, said thank you, and promptly retreated to her room. As a side note, I'd never seen her room up until this point. It was disgusting. Old food everywhere, wrappers in cans. Her bed was half a space to sleep, half pizza boxes and rubbish. The smell was so bad that after the conversation, I went upstairs and threw up. I would only see the inside of that room once again until I moved. So, overly generous peace offering? Yes, but I was desperate. The lack of sleep was really starting to affect my work, social life, and relationship. I hoped it would turn a new leaf. Well, no. All night that night, screaming. I woke up the next day and had a smoke in the garden. As I was pacing, I looked over at her window. Hanging out the window, I see a very damaged Turtle Beach headset. I decided in that moment to destroy her. Before I get into the big stuff, here's a few things I did on top. I would pour salt into her milk and juice. Anytime she left the house, I would cut the Ethernet. I put toothpaste onto her door handle. Any soft drinks she bought, took them to class and donated them to my friends. Anyway, so you notice that I said I had to wait 3 weeks for my cable prank? I became very aware that Kathy barely left the house. She was 100% not going to lectures or assignments. I started posting letters to her faculty, posing as her parents, asking for updates on her studies. After a few weeks, she would start to get into shouting arguments with her parents over the phone. I then started ringing the faculty to let them know when she wasn't in attendance. Our university had a relaxed approach to this, but all courses were expected to have an 85% attendance rating, or you'd face potential problems. After speaking to her staff supervisor, she had a whopping 23% rating. After a few more calls, it was established that she would have a meeting as essentially a case for her to plead herself as to why she should stay. I took the time to somewhat befriend her supervisor and asked if I could be present at the meeting to profess my story and aid in her expulsion. He agreed. As the days to her meeting rolled up, it was clear, due to the arguments with her parents on the phone, that she would not be staying here if she did not keep her position on her course. She began cleaning up after herself and actually spoke to me semi-civilly, begging me not to speak to the university anymore. I told her if she didn't shout anymore all the way to the hearing, then I'd retract all my previous statements and give my verbal support to her staying. Zero noise. I slept like a baby for 3 days. Thursday night, meeting was the Friday, rolls around. A final note, whenever Kathy did get up in the mornings, she had an extremely loud and obnoxious alarm clock, which would be on ages. Thursday night, I give each of my other housemates the rundown and ask them to either skip town for the night and let it run its course. 2 stayed, 2 left. Come 9 p.m., I proceed to invite my entire society around for drinks. 30 people in our tiny house drinking, shouting, and playing loud music until 3 a.m. Kathy comes out angry, begging, at one point in tears, telling me to stop. But this, she had this coming. I go to bed at 4:30 a.m. I wake up at 6 a.m. No noise in the house. Good. She's asleep. I go downstairs to the switchboard and cut the power. I go out, eat breakfast, and go to the meeting at 8:30 a.m. Much to my delight, Kathy does not turn up. At 9 a.m., I give the committee a full rendition of the past 9 months of hell and proceed to strongly advise expulsion. Afterwards, I call my university and fake having the flu. asking for a recovery period of 4 to 5 days. They accept, and I go back home to see my family for a week. I return to a house, one less occupied, with a few standout pieces. In front of my room, the now almost dust Turtle Beach headset. LOL. But I ventured to her room. The smell had not left permanently, but it was bearable now. Many of her possessions were gone, but many left behind. Most notably, her printer and several pieces of balled up paper around it. Firstly, balled up printout copies of flight tickets to her native country and a flight map. A letter from the university denoting her immediate expulsion. A letter from her landlord noting that as per the tenant agreement, if she cannot find study again within 28 days, she would be forced to leave the house. And finally, the creme de la creme, a letter clearly intended for me and the housemates that she gave up on, telling us how this was all our fault and that one day she would come back to haunt us. Thanks for the many upvotes and such, guys. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Most of you, anyway. Dun dun dun. So I'm getting several comments calling me fake or lying and so forth. First off, yes, it's really bad that the university allowed me to be in the disciplinary hearing, let alone even tell me it was happening. I frankly wasn't concerned about the logistics at this point though. I just wanted her gone. Secondly, pointing out race isn't racism. Pointing out that she came from a country with a poor education isn't racism. I'm not racist, it's just background to the story. Trying to paint me as a racist for pointing this out is petty in and of itself. I'm probably going to regret this, but what do you guys think? Do you think it was pertinent for her to mention that her roommate was from Africa? Why or why not? Let us know in the comment section. If you want more where that came from, simply click on one of these boxes right here. And if you liked the video, I assume you did since you're still here, share it with your friends to see what they think. And of course, if you haven't already, click the kitty to subscribe and you'll never miss another video. I'll see you in the next episode of Reddit Chronicles.